I was doing a play for the Eugene O'Neill Festival in Waterford, Connecticut, and I had just graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. In fact, it was about a week later. And it turned out that the director for the show that I was doing in Eugene O'Neill Festival was the father of one of the producers on Dark Shadows. So when I got Dark Shadows, and I'd been screen testing for that all along during the rehearsal period, father and son got together and pretty much decided my career. And I was recast in the play, and then I started Dark Shadows the following week. At first, I have to admit, I felt like I'd probably made a terrible choice because all of my background had been in theater, and that's what I expected to be doing. And I was doing a soap opera, and I felt bad about it. Didn't last for long, but I was very young and very impressionable and very serious about what I was doing, and I really thought I might have made a mistake. It was described as a brand new soap opera. And while I'd still been a student at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, I'd done an audition for something called the ABC Repertory Theater. It never came to pass, but I think that's how the casting people got to know me. And then I went in to meet Dan Curtis, and at first it was just an interview. And then I had a number of camera tests. And it was always presented as a brand new soap. It was a gothic romance, nothing like that was ever mentioned. It was always just a new soap. And I was supposed to play a 1960s waitress. Of course, it was the 1960s. I was playing a waitress in a roadside diner. So it was an ordinary sort of role for what was to be an ordinary soap. Well, I don't think any of us were terribly pleased when we first heard that there was going to be a vampire on the show, although there had been little indications all along that the show was going toward the supernatural. We had a sea captain come back dripping seaweed who'd been dead. But I think that all of us had our misgivings when we realized we were going in that direction. It didn't sound like something wonderful. Right. And then as we started doing it, of course, it was great fun. Right. I think that a lot of the other actors were more aware of the fact that a show could go off the air because of bad ratings. Mm-hmm. For me, it was a day-to-day experience of getting through each show, preparing for it, learning my craft, all of those sorts of things. I really was too young to know that the show could be that precarious. Suddenly we had a crowd outside the stage door, and we were getting mountains of mail, and everything changed. I mean, suddenly we were a cult. And I remember one of the first times it happened, I was taking a trip to Europe, and Joel Crothers, who played my boyfriend on the show, decided to come along at the last minute, and he surprised me, and we flew to Europe together. And I can't tell you the commotion at Kennedy Airport when the two of us just walked through the terminal at Alitalia. It was like Joe and Maggie were running off together. I couldn't believe there were that many people who could recognize us and knew all about us. It was amazing. Dark Shadows did not exist for me for almost 15 years because before the show went off the air, I moved to Europe. I moved to Paris and I got married, and I lived in London, and I did a lot of repertory and a lot of film and television in Britain. And when I came back, it was to do a series for CBS called Big Seamus, Little Seamus. And the show premiered, and yet people would still stop me on the street and say, "Oh, I love your new show. Aren't you Maggie Evans?" So no matter what I did, I was remembered for my very first job. The real reason why I wrote my scrapbook memories of Dark Shadows is because for me it was a sense of closure. I've been away from the show for 15 years. I've been living in Europe. And I came back and I found that the show was more popular than ever, and I was being recognized on the street for what had been my very first job and on camera. And all of a sudden the stories, they all just came back to me in a lump. And then of course Grayson Hall died and Joel Crothers died, and they were very close friends of mine. And so the book just poured out of me.